Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm really glad to see, and I'm going to turn off the transcript so I don't see what it's what I'm saying written down. I thank you for joining us today. I'm really happy to see so many people in the room today, and this is the first of two instances of the same webinar. We will be covering the same thing on Wednesday, so if you accepted both invitations for today and Wednesday, please know that if everything was clear today and you don't have any other questions, you don't need to join us on Wednesday. You're more than welcome to, but you don't have to in case you want to get that hour back in your schedule. We're hoping to cover this in less than an hour today, but realistically, it may take a little bit longer. This will be fairly interactive. We do have a few questions to ask you. It'll be a mix between Teams polls and then a separate poll as well towards the end of the presentation that we would love to get your feedback on. This is really meant to be both to inform you, but also for us to be informed by you. We are kind of at a turning point a little bit in the data harvest, and we would really like to know your thoughts, your pain points, your ideas on how we can make this process better in the future. So if you're not comfortable sharing some of it during the presentation today, we do have our contact information as the last slide, so you're more than welcome to reach out to us separately, and we can chat about any concerns that you may have. So today we'll be talking just about a few things. We'll do brief introductions. We'll talk about the goal of this project, the proposed schema. We'll give a really high-level overview of this year's data harvest, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the data harvest for 2024 and beyond. And then we'll talk about how we want to get there in terms of timeline and tools and steps that we want to go through for this process. So first, this is the GIO team. Megan and Sean, who are circled in green, are in the meeting today and can answer any questions that Matt or I cannot answer. Megan will talk about one slide, but Matt and I will be the main ones talking today. And Matt and I will be the core team for the data harvest at the GIO moving forward. Sean has been crucial, a crucial component of the data harvest for the past few years. But he will be supporting us as needed, but probably taking a little bit of a step back from this project because he's very busy with another large project, which is the imagery and hopefully LiDAR in the near future as well. So I'm fairly new. I haven't been here a month at the GIO. I think a lot of you know me, but if you don't, I'm Marianne. I've been doing GIS since the late 90s. I was in the private sector for 20 years, 20 years. In the last 4 or 5 years, I was with the Polis Center and was the main person working on the data harvest at Polis. I love that project, and one of the reasons I took this job is so I could continue to really be fairly involved with the project and also set the direction of the data harvest. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Matt Evans, and I've been with the GIO's office since August of last year, primarily work on the new Indiana map and getting involved in the data harvest, and some of our initiatives here came from Wayne County. Was the GIS coordinator for about a year, and prior to that worked for the city of Richmond in East Central Indiana for 3.5 years. So really looking forward to get more involved in this project.
Thanks, Matt. And we do have some other folks on the line that have been instrumental over the past few years. Obviously, there's everybody locally who's been submitting data to us, but I also want to highlight some of our partners. Danielle Lefevre is with the Polis Center and will be the main person at Polis helping us during at least this year's data harvest. Steve Leatherman from WTH has been really instrumental as well in providing us kind of that viewpoint from the counties and the locals on how the data is managed on their end, and providing us feedback on the schema and giving us ideas and suggestions moving forward. And Charlene Avey has been a wonderful team member as well. She knows way more about data standards for address points and street center lines than I do, and has been an incredible resource and been involved with a data harvest in one form or another for quite a while as well. So I just want to thank them for being on the call today. And we've had a few others that have helped us recently. There's too many people really to count, but I just wanted to highlight a few of those folks that have been really helpful to us. So first of all, how did we get to where we are today? So the data harvest began in 2008. So if you can believe it, it's been 15 years since it started. But it took until 2018 for us to get 80% of the counties participating, and until 2014 to get 100% county participation. And I'd like Megan, if you can, to kind of fill in the blanks here and talk about the more recent years as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Marianne. And we're also really, really excited to have Marianne join our team recently. So I appreciate her leadership over the last several years from Polis. And as you mentioned, Steve and Charlene. Charlene was working with the data harvest far before I came into the GIO, definitely in my previous life in working with county data for public safety work. So this project has been on IJIC's radar for a number of years and could not have happened without those really key critical participants from local governments and all across the different sectors. So I'll back up just a little bit. 2008, Jim Sparks, our first state GIO, started the data harvest. And I don't know exactly when it got its name, but I like to think about harvesting corn, soybeans, that kind of stuff. So we go all around the state and we collect all these different data sets. And that took a lot of cooperation, a lot of county engagements with every single county. And in 2011, really some key milestones were met in iteratively bringing on counties into these projects, right? And how do we move from 80% to 100%? And 100% participation happened in 2014 when we were able to pick up our last 2 counties to say, yes, we would like to share data. And that really moved Indiana into another realm. So now we've reached that place that we've gotten to that person on the moon idea of trying to do statewide data collection that really people wanted to accomplish. And in 2008, so these milestones that are on here, I want to say these are key milestones throughout the project, but the project has happened and data has been collected every year. And even before 2018, when we were trying to kind of streamline the project and into 2019, we were able to really discover, with Charlene's help and the work of IBRC, with the census and local government's efforts there, we reached some major milestones where we found a lot of addresses that in Indiana that we didn't know existed. And we would not have known that if we didn't do the statewide data harvest. And the results of that, to be more clear, resulted in about $14 million worth of more funding coming from the federal government, because Indiana said, we have addresses you didn't know about. So that was really a return on investment, I think, that none of us really anticipated, but to get an accurate count was really important. And we also in 2018 into 2019 worked with IJIC and some really hard work on trying to figure out what Indiana's addresses and road standards should be. So those 2 things happened in 2018. 2019, we were able to get some funding to then later contract with the Polis Center to help continue to move this project and its maturity forward. One of the key milestones or barriers, excuse me, that we were hitting up against is people could bring their data, but they had a hard time submitting it. Okay, how do we continue to take down and reduce those barriers to entry? So working with the Polis Center and just getting really creative about different ways to meet the counties where they were and what those different methods for data sharing would look like. And in 2020, we started to because of the work with the Polis Center, actually be able to give feedback on what the county data sets look like. That was huge for us, and it was huge for the counties too, I think, because it was very much a one-way street up to that point. So then as we continue to mature, it's thank you for your data. Here's some things that we found with the data sets. And that's where Sean and Marianne would go through and really get into understanding the health of those data sets. So, and fast forward now in 2022, just first time last year, we were able to secure some funding to do some real data improvement. And we'll talk throughout this webinar about what we've used those funds to do and then really what's coming up next. So this has been a long project, and it's going, we're just going to keep making small improvements each time, so for each year. So with that, Marianne, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
So I'm assuming most of you know what the data harvest is, but just in case you don't, it is a collection of local data. We reach out to all 92 counties, and we get four main layers, data layers, and those are address points, road center lines, parcels, and then various administrative boundaries. And as Megan said, we've been receiving this data from all counties. At least the last 4 years that I've been involved, we've received the data from all 92 counties. And we've also even done some pushes, especially on the administrative boundaries, to get a little bit more data there. And I think we can still improve in that area. One of the questions I sometimes hear is, okay, this is great, but what are we really doing with this data? Well, this is a list of state agencies and programs that use this data. I also just got some information this morning. Since January 1st, so sorry, let me back up. One of the items that we produce as part of the data harvest, once we have all the address points, the street center lines, the parcels, is we create a statewide geocoder with this data that we have combined from all 92 counties. And that geocoder is used by a large number of state agencies. Since January 1st, we've had over 50, I think it was 15 million. Now I have to look back if it was 15 or 150 million. But it was in the millions, 15 million hits on the geocoder. It was 15 million. And I just want to point out how crucial this data is. Again, it's used by all of these state agencies. It could be just because they needed to geocode the address. We actually just had a meeting last week with another department, and all they wanted to know was which county an address was in, so that they could point residents from those counties to the right health insurance broker. So it's just used in so many different ways. And it's only growing. We're really a victim of our success. As these agencies learn about this data, they just want to use it more and integrate it into their own processes. There are also a lot of opportunities for this data, both at the local level, and a lot of the things that you see here for redistricting, even hazard mitigation, school funding, those are ways that you can use this data locally. But also at the state level, again, as more agencies find out about this data, they want to use it. And sometimes they need really high quality geocoding information. So that's part of why we're looking at the future of the data harvest on how can we increase the quality of this data that we are collecting even more so that it serves some additional purposes at the state level. Also, while I was at Polis, we had an email address for the data harvest, and throughout the year, I would get many emails from people asking on where can I find this data. Maybe they knew where the data was, but they weren't really aware about the information from the DLGFD assessor data, and they wanted to know like owner information for specific parcels. And so a lot of people need this data in the private sector. At the universities, we would use it at Polis to send out letters to homeowners to inform them about changes in their flood boundaries, for example. So it's used in so many different ways, and we only know a fraction of the use of this data. As I kind of pointed out or mentioned already, there are some issues with the data as we have it, and accuracy is one. Each county deals with their data their own way. There's 92 different counties and 92 different ways of handling the data. But there are some issues in terms of the accuracy and the completeness of the data. Some counties do not have address ranges on their streets, for example. That number has gone down over the past few years, but we still have a few that do not have address ranges. When you get to the borders between counties, there are a lot of issues with overlapping boundaries or boundaries that don't go quite to the county boundary, or people's county boundary. Every county's boundary is not perfectly aligned with the next county's boundary. So there are some issues there. There are some fields that are not populated and that we don't receive, and it would be really helpful to have that information. We also really would like to do a better job of educating folks about the data. Policymakers believe that agencies were already using this data, but really we're not. And so we really need to educate our policymakers on what this data is and how accurate it is and how it was created. Up until this this past year, we really did not have well, we have a state GIS fund, but it was never funded. But that is about to change, I believe, July 1st. There will be actual funding for the GIO, and that will help us improve a lot of data sets and support the counties as well in improving the data sets on their end. Matt is going to talk to us about a pilot project that we did this past year. So Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So as Mary Ann mentioned, throughout the years of the data harvest, there were some challenges with data quality from different data sets identified that were kind of critical for our geocoding and our routing needs, but also other kind of validation projects and business needs that a lot of the state agencies and others had. So during this whole kind of initiative of collecting and looking forward to improving the data, the GIO's office launched a pilot project last year that really took off this year and has been coming to its close over the last month or so. So on the map on the screen, there are 5 counties highlighted in green, which are the 5 counties that volunteered staff time and resources and vendor time to take part in this pilot project, which I'll just read real quick. Kosciuszko County, Randolph County, Hamilton County, Monroe County, and Dubois County all took part in this project. So a few of these were represented by vendors and WTH, and the others were represented by their dedicated GIS staff within the local government. So this project was an opportunity to deploy some data validation tools that would let the users submit their data, run them through these kind of validation processes, and generate reports both in written and kind of spatial format to look at where errors were occurring within some various data sets. So I'll real quick talk about kind of some examples of what these validations were. Some were geometric based, so checking for duplicate addresses based on location, duplicate parcels, overlaps between 2 different parcels within the same data set, spikes and kickbacks, so kind of extremely narrow slivers within a parcel's geometry, but also a lot of cross-feature validation. So comparing the parcel, state parcel identifier between your parcel polygon features to your assessor's CAMA tables to make sure that those joins could be performed when needed. Also validating address points, address attributes to parcels and CAMA addresses, and a lot of validations into address points attributes, specifically following the NENA or Next Gen 911 standard to take a close look at a lot of the attribute values for those address points. So talk a little bit about why we undertook this pilot project. So I think knowing that there was going to be kind of a larger scale initiative to partner with the kind of statewide local government community, GIS community on data improvement and data validation, was wanted to ensure that we could take on such a huge project in a successful way and learn about the correct and kind of ideal workflows and validation approaches to make sure that that larger project goes as smoothly and with a minimal burden to local governments as possible. Also learned a lot about how local governments and vendors approached the data cleanup, how long it took them to implement the changes that were shown needed from the validation solution, and really get a deeper understanding of how those counties and vendor user experiences worked out in the pilot project, and how that's going to help inform our approach for the larger scale to make this as smooth as possible. Mary Ann, you can go to the next slide when you're ready. So I'll real briefly go through the timeline for this pilot project, starting in kind of August of 22, a series of meetings between the GIO staff with the DOR and DLGF, which is the Indiana State Department of Revenue and Department of Local Government Finance. During this period, partnered through a contract with a vendor called One Spatial, who provides kind of like a cloud-based data validation, spatial data validation solution. In October, really started looking at which counties to select and partner with on this project, and start looking at a lot of the actual data validation rules for these workflows that the solution would be running through and generating the reports off of. A lot of that data rule development was finished in November of last year, and started scheduling onboarding for the 5 counties, staff and vendors to really kick off the project, which started a lot in more depth, I guess, this year, where we actually had recurring meetings with the local staff and the teams from One Spatial, doing training on the validation solutions so that people could start submitting their data and generating the reports. And from February to March of this year, spent a lot more time, at least from the local end, on actually implementing the suggested corrections or fixing errors that were generated from the validation solutions. As the project is winded down, we've shared that pilot data back with the Department of Local Government Finance and the Department of Revenue, and are finishing, kind of wrapping up that project and gathering our takeaways for the kind of next phase of the data harvest and data improvement efforts. All right, so talk a little bit about takeaways, both in terms of kind of a project needs base and a actual kind of what we learned from the validation solution, all the reports that were generated. So for the larger project, I have 3 kind of primary takeaways on what we learned we need to be making sure that we're taking a lot of care for when we take this on the state scale. So making sure that we provide a lot of effective, easy to digest, but also detailed educational resources that are going to explain both our schema standards and the kind of validation level standards. So what kind of errors any platform that we deploy is going to be testing for, and the desired outcomes from the project for the people that are actually going to be implementing any of these changes. A lot more of both kind of potential webinar, looking at classroom, and possibly even one-on-one training on whatever validation solution we end up deploying, and the kind of workflow processes that go on behind the scenes, and GIO support for the data stewards taking on this cleanup. So making sure that we have kind of an in-house subject matter expert that can be a easy to reach point of contact for the people that are working on this project to get their questions answered, their concerns addressed, and all that kind of stuff. Throughout this project, from a kind of what data was submitted perspective, found that attribute errors through that NextGen 911 or NENA submission were a lot more common than the geometry errors. Like I said, for address, kind of duplicate addresses, parcel overlaps, and all of that kind of stuff. With that in mind, the workload needed to correct these different errors can be much different. A lot of attribute errors can possibly and often could be kind of bulk processed, as they were based in many times based in attribute value kind of formatting, but actually fixing like an overlap between 2 parcel polygons might take a little bit more time, both to implement the change, but also research, which geometry is the more correct one from your deeds or whatever your source might be. I think that.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. So we have a few solutions that we have in mind and that we want to start implementing here in the near future. We've already talked about, the statewide data improvements and expanding the pilot to a larger number of counties and hopefully to the whole state eventually, and standardizing the data schema and workflows. We do have reliable funding now, which will help us provide more support and also have the tools in place to help the counties and the local government to improve their data and meet the schema. But we also want to be able to work with local governments on understanding their internal processes, how they are using this data. Are they transforming the data just to submit to the data harvest, or are they using that data as is internally? Could they use it in the new format, in the new schema? And then just identifying, where we could basically provide the most benefit to the local governments and the counties to help them out. So for the proposed schema, we have been using a form of the NENA Next Gen 911 standard since at least 2020. We haven't used the whole standard for address points and street center lines. For 23, we're going to be implementing something very similar to what we had before. It's like 90 to 99% the same. So in case you're worried about it for this year, the changes should be really minimal. And we are using that standard that's listed there on the slide. That's the latest one. That latest one did change the NENA globally unique ID field. It changed its name and it changed the format to honestly something that I find more complicated. So I know that we'll need to really explain that, and honestly, I'll need to better understand the format myself. We've also decided some of the fields that I would try to populate when I was working on, correcting the data that I was receiving from the counties to make it fit into the schema that we are using. We've decided those fields really, they don't provide a whole lot of value. And those are the street name pre-modifier, the pre-type separator, and the post-modifier. They complicate things a little bit. If you want to use those fields internally, that's great. Please go ahead and do so. We will certainly not get rid of that information, but we are not requiring you to fill out those 3 fields. There were 2 other fields that we were especially looking for, and we've kind of learned that they're sort of overcome by events. They're not used as much anymore. And those are the ESN and MSAG community name. So if you've been, if that's been something that's been tough for you to fill out, just know that we no longer are really looking for that. Again, it's okay for you to populate it if that's useful for you. But it's not one of our key fields that we are looking for. So for 2023, the timeline is going to be the same as it has been in the past. Next month, we'll be sending out information about the data harvest. I think probably July 31st, because that's a Monday, we'll be sending out an email saying, hey, we're accepting data now, and we'll provide a link to a form to fill out, and we'll provide you information on how to upload your data. We would like to get that data by the end of August, but if not, September is when we'll be reaching out to any stragglers to get their data. And we need that data soon because we want to try to provide the statewide parcel data in October. So we need to get the parcels all cleaned up and combined together. And we need to start working on some of the boundary files as well. And then we'll be working on address points and street boundaries with the hope of publishing all of that by the end of this year and at the latest early January 2024. And then probably January 24, we will work on developing the new geocoder for the state and providing all of the documentation that goes with the layers. So this is very similar to what we did last year in 2022. So we're just sticking with the same thing for this year. This is the list of the fields that we would really like to see populated this year for address points. This should be very similar to what you had before. The one new field that we're adding in is a county field. And the reason for that, one, is part of the NENA standard, but 2, there are a number of counties who give us data that include address points outside of their county. And if you remember earlier, I mentioned that the county boundaries don't always match up between counties. And so we can't really use that to figure out which county an address is in. So if you could label your addresses to say which county they are for, that would be incredibly helpful for us, also to help us identify some of those duplicates. We would really like everybody to populate the global unique identifier. That's a great way for you to then compare the data at the end of the data harvest process versus what you submitted to us. That'll be a unique identifier for every feature, regardless of, that'll be unique for anybody in the county. There should not be any duplicates in there. And then the state parcel identifier is a great one to have as well, if you could put that in. We would really like the postal community name and the incorporated municipality, if there is one, for each address as well. For streets, it should look very similar to what we had last year. We're looking for address ranges. We're looking for the street address fields. Again, we're not pushing for the pre or post modifier or the pre-type separator. But if you could, we would like you to populate the pre-type. The big ones there are things like US highway, county road, interstate, those big ones that really help us identify what kind of road this is. And then again, we would like to see incorporated municipality, postal code, and postal community name. That was meant to be county, not country, so I'll have to fix that after this. They're all in the US, so that's really easy. So that is what 23 will look like, which should be incredibly similar to what 22 was like. So let's talk a little bit about 24 and beyond. Really, it's going to look very similar to what we had now, but there's a few extra fields that we would like to start seeing being populated. Some of these may be a little weird and are not really obvious at first what it's referring to. But the discrepancy agency ID is really the agency that would receive a discrepancy report, and that takes the responsibility for resolving any kind of discrepancies. That could be the same as the 911 authority, and that is one of the things we're willing to kind of clarify and educate people on what that means. The date updated, effective date, expiration date. These are all really useful for us to identify, is the street, has it been changed since the last time we collected the data? Is it currently an effective street? Like, does it exist? Address point, or does it no longer exist? Does that address have an expiration date? Some examples is the Marion County keeps track of all the street center lines, and even the ones that no longer exist. And so there's a field in there that indicates whether or not that street should be used or not. And that's kind of what we're trying to grab in here, so we can keep maybe that historic data, but also if an address is only valid for a few months, then we know when it's effective and when that address is no longer valid through the expiration date. We'd like to stay populated. That should be really easy. We would like to have the unincorporated community as well, if we can. We'd like to have the building. So if you have the same address but multiple buildings, we would want basically the building information for that address. We'd like the floor. The floor is helpful, especially for response purposes. So knowing which floor an address is on will help inform first responders on where to go. We would like the complete landmark name. So if you have an address that's also known by a specific name, so for example, the State Government Building North could be a landmark name. Government Building South could be a landmark name. On university campuses, a lot of the buildings will have names as well as an address. So it may be that somebody knows where they are based on the building name, but they don't really know the address. So it's an easy way to find that information. Some counties have been providing us with kind of mileposts when they deliver address points, and we didn't really have a field for that in the standard that we were using. So we'd like to start using the milepost information, and we would love to get that information provided to us as well. Again, that's helpful for first responders to locate people. And then the placement method, that is the methodology used for the placement of an address point. This is going to look very similar for streets. A lot of these fields are the same. The difference, we already have some counties that are filling out the parity left and right. That indicates basically the address ranges on each side. And I always have to read it a few times to understand what that means, but we'll, again, provide educational materials on those. But we'd like to get the one-way filled out. I know a lot of counties do fill it out, but not in a way that matches the NINA schema. And we can't easily convert it. If we can easily convert it, we have done it, but oftentimes we cannot. The values are from, to, from, and both in the NINA standard, and a lot of counties are populating something that really doesn't help us. It may say like going north or going south, but we'd have to look at each segment in which direction it's going in, which is a little bit beyond what we can do as part of the data harvest. We'd love to get speed limits and also that unincorporated community on each side of the street. So I think overall these changes are fairly minor. I hope they are. But we are looking for more counties to submit the data in the schema that we are requesting the data in. So in the next section, we'll be covering how we plan to do these improvements and the timeline as well. But first, we have our first question for all of you. So if you could take the time to answer that question, that would be really great. Really what we're looking for is who will implement the schema for your data. Is it, county staff? Is it a vendor that you are currently working with? Is it another vendor? If we had a list of GIO approved vendors who are familiar with the standard, would you want to be able to use one of those vendors to implement the schema? Or maybe you don't know, or you have another idea that we couldn't think of. If you could answer that, that would be great. And I think that once you vote, you will see the results. I'm going to close mine. But Matt, how are we doing on responses?
Let's give it another 10, 15 seconds.
All right. It looks like right now, a lot of folks, almost half are saying county GIS staff would be the one handling it. And then we've got a split between a current vendor or you don't know yet, which is fine. And then we've got some other ones. So we'll be interested in looking at the answers to those questions. So thank you for taking the time to answer that poll. I'm going to move on to the next slide, just in the interest of time. All right, so what's next? We want to increase the data quality over time, and this is really going to be little by little. We understand that not every county will be able to provide perfect data. Honestly, I don't think we can ever get perfect data, but little by little over the years, just like we have from 2008 to today, we'll probably want to increase the data quality. And that's both in terms of attributes, but also geography. And that may be done through additional rules that we may put through that we may make available through this online interface to submit your data and get like a report of any kind of errors or issues that exist with your data. We also want to potentially provide some funding to counties and local governments to be able to improve their schema to meet the needs that we have for the state and other groups. Again, we want to provide tools so that you can easily identify issues with your data. We had one county that participated in the pilot and they thought their data was really good until they ran it through the QC check that we had made available for the pilot, and then they found all of these issues that existed with it. So you may think it's really great, and then you'll find some typos in your street types, or maybe a field you didn't realize you needed to populate needs to be populated. We hope to provide some tools to fix some common data issues that you might have. At some point in the future, we would love to be able to do more frequent data updates instead of just once a year. We understand that may not be possible for all counties, but for those where that is possible, we'd love to be able to implement that. Again, that's not going to be in the next year or two. We're looking at that down the road. And then we would have a new submission platform as well available for everybody. So we have one more question for you right now, and that is, if we provided you with some web-based tools that would fix some common errors, would you like to use that? Do you think that that would be helpful? And again, we really want to get this information because we want to make sure that where we are investing our time and our money is worthwhile. So yeah, it'd be great to know the answers to that. So it looks like most people are really interested in that. We got about half of absolutely and half of maybe, depending on the tool. One thing we do want to point out is we are definitely looking for something that is software agnostic. So whether you use Esri or QGIS or some other kind of GIS software, we want to make those tools, we want to make sure that they work for any kind of format. So thank you very much for answering that poll question. All right, so one of the things that we also really learned from the pilot, but also just from discussions with folks, is we really need to do a better job explaining what each field means. I often find myself thinking a field means, you know, A, and then when I read the documentation, I realize it means B. When I was receiving data from counties, I would see, you know, what each field, how it was populated, and be like, oh, that's not what I'm looking for, but now I can see why you interpreted this field name this other way. So we want to provide really good documentation that explains to you what it is. We don't want to make any assumptions. Oftentimes, especially in the GIS field, I feel like I may use a specific word, and in the IT field, it may mean something completely different than what we use. So we want to make sure that we have this information clearly identified. We may want to provide some recommended workflows, some webinars, and potentially other options. So we've got one more poll question for all of you, and we're really interested to know what you think would be the best way for you to be educated about the schema. What would be the most helpful? Oh, you know what? And I think, can you select more than one option on that one, Matt? No? Okay. All right. We meant to make it a multi-choice question, so apologies for that. Maybe pick the one that you think would be the most helpful for you. But if you want to add some stuff, if you want to check other and then type some stuff in, if you want to indicate multiple ways, or if you want to put something in the chat, please do so. But we're definitely interested in knowing what is the most helpful for you so that we can invest our resources in the right places. I'm going to give you all a second to answer that. Okay, so the overwhelming answer for the most helpful is documentation and how-tos with a little bit of webinars and a little bit of support from our staff, and then a lot of other. So I'll be really interested to see those answers. And feel free, I believe you can still answer that poll question. I'm going to go to the next slide. Maybe Matt, keep it up for just a little bit longer. Okay, so the other thing that we want to do is provide greater county recognition for good data. So we've had the gold and silver star counties. We implemented that, I think, last year. I think before that, we just had the gold star counties. We're going to keep that in 2023, but then starting in 24, we are planning on using these QC tools to identify and really kind of have a more data-backed way of looking at people's data and having, looking at percentages and how many fields were correctly populated and how well, so that we can have a little bit better county recognition for the quality of the data. We also hope to be able to give reports to counties so that you have actionable feedback to improve your data, and you know specifically where you need to go and focus some of your time and resources, because we know you only have so much time to do this, and we want to make sure that you put it in the right places when it comes to the data harvest. So for the timeline, we are, in 22, we started with a pilot project. We implemented the pilot project earlier this year. We've wrapped that up. We have kind of all the summary reports. Jim Sparks, a former GIO, reached out to every county that participated in the pilot and kind of got their feedback through one-on-one conversations. And now we're working on identifying which data improvement tools we need to implement for 2024. And also, again, education and how we can provide the information that everybody will need to meet these expanded standards, and also how to learn to use these new tools that we will be implementing, hopefully, in 2024. And then as these tools are in place, we'll want to learn from you on what were your pain points, what was easy, how can we help you more in the future, and just improve our practices and listen to feedback, make improvements where needed, whether that's through the tools or through education or through supports or through funding. So we will want to learn from you as we go and implement this. So we have a few more questions we would like to ask all of you. We couldn't really use the Teams poll for that, so we've got it through just an online form. We've got the QR code there if you want to do it on your phone, or Matt is putting that link in the chat. If you could fill that out as well, that would be great. Most of those are kind of free entry, they're text boxes. If you could fill those out, we would really love to get that feedback so that, again, we can focus our energy and our resources where we need to focus it and not put it somewhere that you really don't care about and will not use. Beyond today, I do want to provide you with the contact information for Matt and myself. So here are email addresses, and Matt, I'm going to put mine in the chat if you wouldn't mind putting yours in the chat as well in case you want to just copy paste it. So if you have any additional thoughts, questions, just feedback, please do reach out to us. We have done a little bit of updating on the hub site that we have for the data harvest. So that QR code there will get you to that hub site, and we'll put a link to that in the chat as well, so that you can click on it. We're getting ready for the 2023 data harvest. That website is mostly up to date. The only thing we're still working on is finalizing the schema. And really there are some, we're looking at the boundary layers that we're asking for and cleaning that up a little bit. There's a few boundaries that we were asking for before that we don't think we really need anymore. And then we want to make sure that there are no new ones that we would be looking for. So once we have that finalized, hopefully this week, we will put out the new data schema and make it available for you to download from the hub site. But right now, if you click on it, it's still pointing to the 2022 schema, which again is very similar but slightly different. There's also been changes made to the street types. So those get updated on a regular basis. So every year we've been updating that domain for the street types as well. So that's it for our presentation. I wanted to see, does anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or post something in the chat, anything that you might have to share. Hopefully that means everything was clear and not confusing or overwhelming. I hope this is not too scary. We really want to try to do this in a way that is helpful and try to make your lives a little bit easier over time, not more complicated. Polis will continue to work on the data harvests this year, so you will see, when you're ready to submit your data, Polis will be the one emailing you and contacting you if you're not submitting your data or if they have questions about your data. So you'll be hearing from Danielle again this year, just like you did last year. All right, well, we'll hang out here for a little bit longer, for a few more minutes. So if you don't have any questions, thank you again very much for joining. Please fill out that online survey that we posted in the chat. We will be looking at all of that. Again, the webinar on Wednesday will be the same content, except I'll fix that one typo from country to county. And yeah, thanks again for joining on a Monday morning. I'm muted. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I think everybody's ready for lunch, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. Have a great week.